Hello and welcome to today's webinar where we will be discussing ransomware and more specifically how to build a ransomware preparedness strategy. My name is Simon Robinson and I'm Principal Analyst with Enterprise Strategy Group, part of TechTarget. So let me start with a quick agenda for today's session. We're going to do some introductions to our guest speakers shortly. Then I'm going to be spending a bit of time presenting an overview of some of our recent research around the ransomware market and how the focus is really shifting to recoverability. Then we'll have representatives from ExaGrid talk us through their solution, and then we'll look ahead to what's coming next as wrap-up.
So my name is Bill Andrews. I'm the CEO of ExaGrid, and I've been the CEO for about 19 years. And with me, I have Tom Gillispie. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Bill. My role here at ExaGrid within the engineering organization is as a director of Application Interoperability, and then also have a role within product management. Have been here at ExaGrid for a number of years. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you both. So the topic today, as we say, is ransomware preparedness. And I'd like to start off with a bit of context, because I don't think it's an understatement to say that we are in the middle of a ransomware epidemic. It's on a scale that we've never seen before, even though actually the true scale is hard to know because it's rarely disclosed when there is a ransomware attack. But when it is disclosed, it makes headlines. And that's often because ransomware has an impact on a real human level. For example, there was a recent attack in the UK on a pathology lab that had severe impacts on London hospitals and on their ability to function. Ransomware is also a constantly evolving space, and it's become a boardroom level issue for many organizations. And therefore, having a strategy in place is absolutely essential. Now, for those who maybe are not familiar, ransomware is a type of malware that locks and encrypts a victim's data, files, devices, or systems and renders them inaccessible and unusable until the attacker receives a ransom payment. Now, Enterprise Strategy Group has been researching this market for several years. We recently, last year, conducted a survey of 600 IT and cybersecurity professionals at organizations in North America and Western Europe. And this research revealed that organizations are experiencing frequent, persistent attacks that often wreak havoc on their operations, on their data systems, on their reputations, and more. In this survey, more than 75% of organizations said they'd been subject to an attempted or successful ransomware attack in the last 12 months. Many organizations are experiencing attacks on a much more frequent basis. So ransomware is no longer a matter of if the organization will be hit, but rather when. Decision makers increasingly recognize that ransomware is a foundational threat to the viability of their business and operations. And as such, it's imperative for organizations to develop a ransomware preparedness strategy. Okay, let's dig into some of the data. So this first chart really underscores that the market is increasingly understanding of the extent of the ransomware threat. And this is actually good news in that organizations are taking this threat seriously. Nonetheless, the ransomware threat is viewed by many as existential to their organization. Almost 90% view ransomware as a top 5 threat to their viability, and 13% call it the single biggest threat to their organization. Now, this understanding often comes from the fact that many organizations have already been hit by successful ransomware attacks. As I already noted, around 3/4 said they'd already experienced an attack. When we ask about the extent of that attack, the results are again pretty sobering. Although there is some improvement compared to when we asked the same question a year ago, almost 1/4 said that the impact had been extensive, with a broad impact across multiple business functions and involving a significant amount of data and applications. And let's remember also, these are often mission or business critical applications that are being impacted. So we also asked about how well developed are incident response strategies to ransomware attacks. The results are definitely mixed here, especially considering our assumption that these attacks will happen. But the good news is that almost all organizations at least have a strategy, although only 40% that those strategies are well defined and thoroughly tested. And maybe this helps explain why many attacks are successful and why we're seeing repeated attacks in some cases. And this again underscores why all organizations must make this a priority. So let's turn to the backup environment specifically. Why are we talking about backup? Because the backup is often the one thing that stands between an attacker and getting their ransom payment. Therefore, it's no surprise that most respondents are rightly worried about the security of their backup and recovery infrastructure. In fact, almost 1 in 3 expressed serious concerns here. And I think this level of concern is actually healthy, as it will likely prompt the necessary investments in defensive measures and enhancements to recover data, systems, and infrastructure. And at this point, I'd actually like to bring in Bill. Bill, what are you seeing here in your customer base regarding awareness of backups and the backup infrastructure as a target for ransomware attackers?
That's a great question. And I've probably talked to myself over 100 CIOs and CISOs directly about this topic over the last couple of years. And clearly what's happening is, as you know, there's a phishing attempt. Somebody clicks on an email or some link. They launch code into the network where they can monitor password usage. And ultimately, they see the usage of the IT folks' passwords. And now they can log into whatever systems they want. They can therefore encrypt the data and run their code to encrypt the data. They can copy data first before they encrypt it, turning the scanners on and off. And then they go right after the backup storage. They try to delete and often succeed in deleting all that backup storage. So now you have copied data potentially out of your network. All of your primary data is encrypted, so your users cannot work. There's no access. And then your backup storage is gone. Right. So the key here is, how do you make the backup storage, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, stand in a way in which it can be recovered no matter what, if there's this type of attack, so that you can recover all of your primary data and continue operations, A, for productivity and minimal downtime, and B, to avoid paying the ransom.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. So we've talked about the threat. Let's move to talking about how we deal with this threat. So just like with any other business impacting event, the critical question here is, how do we recover quickly in the event that an attack is successful? So we asked organizations here, how are they thinking differently about recovery from a ransomware attack, and whether this is fundamentally different to recovering from let's say, a more traditional outage or disaster. And this tells us that the majority do view ransomware recovery as a different beast, and so it requires a slightly different approach. So the obvious question here is, well, how is it different? Well, turns out it's different on multiple levels. It requires different technologies and features. It involves different workflows and processes. It's viewed by more than half as more complex than traditional recovery. And that's interesting. I mean, obviously, this is a relatively newer phenomenon. It's less mature and it's constantly evolving in terms of the threat. It also involves different personnel. Most obviously, it's the security team. So we're going to have the security teams and the data protection, the backup recovery teams working together. Bill, I'm curious, are you hearing the same thing from your customers?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what we're also hearing is how underprepared they are. The threat actors right now, in our estimation, have the leg up on this. We're watching organizations use passwords without using 2FA. Threat actor gets your password and they can log in. But if you had 2FA turned on, they would also need your mobile device, which they don't have. We see organizations believe that the backup storage itself, as long as the backup application or the media server is secure, they're secured. Yet we see media servers and backup applications compromised. A lot of the times due to people not having them configured correctly. We're forever making moves, adds, and changes. And secondly, they can get a hold of a rogue server somewhere and snake their way over to the backup storage. And when they delete that backup storage, it's gone. And often people say, but we're going to have immutability. And everyone has immutability. That's table stakes. What you need to have is a copy of the backups that the threat actor cannot see and cannot access, so that when they delete, they may delete the most recent copies of that backup, but they're not getting to all the backups and you can recover.
So it could well be that these differences in the approach are impacting an organization's ability to recover all of their data from an attack. And the research again says that most organizations are not recovering all of their data from an attack. In fact, as we see here, only one respondent in 7 said they could restore all of their data following a ransomware attack. And this really underscores that the recovery process needs to be, well, at the very least, re-examined and tested, and probably it needs to be augmented or even completely re-engineered in order to be fit for purpose in the ransomware era. One additional perspective here is that the extent of the damage seems to be more extensively managed in Europe versus in North America. So my final point in this section is just to quickly look at what organizations are doing as part of this recovery process augmentation or re-engineering. One of the things we see is real growth in things like, as Bill talked about, creating immutable copies, creating air-gapped storage. And there's really strong interest in organizations using their existing data protection solutions, processes, approaches, and leveraging that into the ransomware space as well. An extra dynamic here is whether organizations are doing this in the cloud or on premises. The reality is that we see a mixture of both, although there does seem to be a growing preference for using on-premises solutions. And now, to really take us into more detail around this, I'm going to hand it back over to Bill, and Bill's going to take us through the ExaGrid solution. So over to you, Bill.
So a couple points first on ExaGrid, just to make you a little bit more familiar with ExaGrid. All we do is backup storage. We're not in primary storage. We're not in archive storage. We're not in backup applications. We sit behind the industry's leading backup applications, over 25 of them, as the backup storage. We've been shipping our solutions for over 15 years, so it's time and tested. We are the largest independent backup storage vendor in the industry. We have the only, what you'll see here in a minute, tiered backup storage approach, which allows us to do what we're going to show you around ransomware recovery. We have a very high net promoter score, saying that customers would recommend us to colleagues. We have the most industry awards. In fact, we just put out a press release and we'll be putting out another. We've just won 4 more industry awards. We have over 4,000 customers installed, and our product is certified in over 132 countries. Those 4,000 customers are installed in over 81 countries, where we have in-theater support. We have over 300 published customer success stories on our website, and over 170 Gartner Peer Insight reviews on Gartner. And why do I tell you this? This is to show you that we talk to customers all day. We're not talking, 10, 20, 30 customers here. We're deeply involved in understanding what they're running into and what they're trying to avoid. So as we talk through this, a lot of this comes from a lot of years and a lot of conversations. So if you look at traditional legacy backup storage, you'll see 2 things. Customers take primary storage and take that primary storage from Dell or HP or Network Appliance or someone, and they put that behind the backup application. The challenge you have with that is, where's the security? Number 1. Number 2, they're not tweaked for ingest performance, so you don't get really fast performance because it may be tweaked for transactional files or maybe NAS files, but not for large backup jobs. And it becomes expensive very quickly because in backup, you traditionally keep weeks, months, and years of retention for legal discovery, financial audits, regulatory audits, etc. And so as a result, the primary storage is not secure in today's world. It's not necessarily fast, and it's very expensive. The second is inline deduplication appliances, such as a Dell Data Domain or HPE Store ones, where the data is deduplicated inline on the way to the disk, which is great because it absolutely saves storage, right? It compares at the block level each retention point in backup to another and greatly reduces the storage and cost. However, you have three major problems. The first is that the inline is slow for ingest, so the backup window is long. The second is to restore takes a long time because you have to rehydrate all the data for every request. But more importantly, these are network facing, and therefore as network facing appliances, they're easy for attack. If you want to create a separate pool of storage, an air gap pool of storage, you have to buy a whole nother set of appliances and additional software, which doubles the cost and increases the complexity. So these types of approaches can be slow, they can be expensive, and they can be insecure. So what did ExaGrid see here, and what did we do differently? We looked and said, you really do want the performance of disk for backup and restore, right? Where there's no inline deduplication and no data rehydration. So in our appliances, we have a front-end landing zone. You back up straight to that landing zone for ingest performance. The data is in an undeduplicated format for fast restores. But you also need to collapse the cost of the storage. So we saw the world that there's two types of data. There's the data you need to keep users productive, right? Somebody deletes a file, overwrites a file, has a corrupted file, has an encrypted file, and you have to restore it. You want to restore that from an undeduplicated copy of that file to keep your users productive, right? Fast restores. But then you keep weeks, months, and years of data for all of the other reasons I mentioned earlier. And as a result, you want that in a deduplicated form. So we then deduplicate all the data, including what's in the landing zone, into the repository. So now you get the best of both worlds. You get a fast backups, fast restores on the front end, but collapse of the cost of storage by taking all the retention into a deduplicated form. You pick up, however, a total different benefit from this architecture, and it comes down to security. So as we work with companies all over the world, we have built out a complete suite of features and functions for comprehensive security. So it's much more than just ransomware recovery, right? I think that is the hottest one in the market, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But you can see here on the Security Shield all the different functionality that ExaGrid has in the realm of security, which we've been adding over the years as customers request it. At this point, when we ask our employees all around the world and our customers and our resellers, are we missing any key security features at this time? The good news is the answer comes back no. And if there ever is, we will add that as well. We just follow our customers' lead on these things. So back to the architecture, we had mentioned there was a repository tier. And that repository tier where all the deduplicated data lives is not on the network. The front-end landing zone is network-facing and attached to the network. But the repository tier is not. Only our object code can get to it. It's a tiered air gap. The threat actor can't see that tier. The threat actor can't get at that tier, which is the key, right? Because if they can get at things, we know they can delete them. So let's assume for a second that the primary data is encrypted. Let's assume that the backup application or the backup storage is hacked and all the backup data is deleted. For disk or any deduplication appliance, that data is all gone. And we have seen this time and time again as we replace the traditional older solutions. And in fact, even on the right-hand side, even the ExaGrid landing zone will be wiped out. Anything network-facing gets wiped out under these attacks. But the good news is what we had in the repository, including, by the way, everything that's in the landing zone, is still intact after the attack because it's not network-facing.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bill. Now, at this point, I'd like to bring Tom in because I have a couple of questions for Tom. So I guess the first question is, what's the role of the backup application in this, and what changes, if any, would I need to make as a customer to the backup application to get this going from a ransomware point of view?
Yeah, great question, Simon. So the good news is there's no changes to the backup environment. It's already been using the ExaGrid for backups and previous restores. Once the ransomware attack has happened, ExaGrid's able to bring back data as of when you need it, and the backup application can do the recovery just as normal with all the advantages and all the features of the backup application.
Oh, that's really interesting. So no changes Fascinating.
Yeah.
So the other question I had was just on recovery times. How long typically are you seeing after customers get hit with a ransomware attack? How long is it before they can get their systems back up and running?
So usually customers will head for a strategy of restoring first their critical tier, their tier one sort of environments, or you can just press ahead with all. Bill will talk in a second about our scale out architecture, which brings a high degree of concurrency, which is the name of the game in backup performance and also restore performance. So combining the ExaGrid architecture with the backup environment, you're able to get your environment restored after the attack.
Great, thanks.
So let's take a look at this. If you look at the front end, which is network facing, that's where the data lives. The ransomware attacker deletes that data, but all of the data in the repository remains. Now, what we have in addition, all the data inside of that repository are immutable data objects, but we also have something that's also as unique as the tiered air gap, and that is delayed deletes. When somebody deletes data in a landing zone, we don't know if that's an operational delete that's intentional, an operational delete that's unintentional, or that's a threat actor delete. So we delay deleting any data in the repository by whatever time frame you give us. There's a policy you can set up, and you can say, don't delete that data for 10, 20, 30 days, whatever makes sense for your organization. So that when data is deleted in the landing zone, and again, we don't know if it's intentional, unintentional, or a threat attack, we will not delete that data in the repository for whatever number of days is set up in the delay delete policy. You also have two people that have to authorize that, an IT person with their login password and 2FA, and a security role person with their password and 2FA. So to go in and change the policy requires somebody from IT and somebody for security to clear that with both a password and two-factor authentication. So what happens here is you get an attack on Monday, everybody's running around with their hair on fire, the backup admin just stops the clock and says, we got 14 more days on ExaGrid anyway, let me just stop the clock. Now we have all the time in the world to recover. We have customers every week who get attacked and every week use us to recover. We have over 4,000 customers using our retention time lock capability, which we call RTL for retention time lock around the world, and they are able to recover. We have constantly replaced other solutions where there was an attack and all the data was deleted on the primary storage that was sitting behind the backup application or on the network-facing deduplication appliances that were sitting behind that backup application. And then when they get attacked with ExaGrid back there, we are able to recover. This is the only delay delete policy and tiered air gap solution for backup storage currently in the industry. We also have complete scale out where you can simply add more appliances because every appliance has processor memory, networking, and storage. And if you double, triple, quadruple your data, we double, triple, quadruple all the resources. And we can scale up to a 6 petabyte full backup with the deduplication repository, which is 4 times larger than our closest competitor. Lastly, I don't think we should leave this out, even though this is about ransomware. Boy, are we seeing climate change affect IT around the world. Floods, increased tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, depending on where you are in the world. And it's becoming more and more important to also make sure that you can survive a ransomware attack, but you also survive a natural disaster or even a fire, which is a man-made disaster inside one of your buildings. So we can replicate to an ExaGrid at one of your other data centers, into a colo facility. We can replicate to AWS and Azure if you want your disaster recovery to be in the public cloud. And we can also now, and we're getting more requests for this, do tertiary hops so that you can have a second DR center, your primary backup, your first level DR center, and your second level DR center. And we can replicate from site A to site B and site A to site C, if that's how your network topology is set up. Or we can replicate from site A to B to C in triple hop. And in any case, site C could be a physical location, or site C can be the cloud. So in short, we have a separate landing zone for performance, fast backups, fast restores, a repository tier to collapse the cost of storage through aggressive data deduplication for all the retention data, as well as to produce a non-network facing tier for ransomware recovery. As we showed you, a complete suite of comprehensive security features, not just ransomware recovery. We also, of course, scale and continue to scale out as your data grows with very low cost for a long list of reasons that we could cover on another cast when we get a chance. And we also assign level 2 support engineers to customers, no gatekeepers, no level 1s, no queues, no getting tossed around. You deal with the same person that is assigned to you all the time, so you get a senior person and you don't have to repeat yourself. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Simon.
Great. Thanks, Bill. So wrapping up, I just wanted to just show one more slide. And really, that's to look at how organizations are thinking about this from a kind of funding perspective. And the headline here is that all of the awareness, the reality that many organizations are feeling on the ransomware front is translating into spending. Organizations know that this is not a problem that they can ignore. It's an area that they need to invest in. And as we're seeing, many organizations are planning to increase their spending on ransomware preparedness over the coming months, with a substantial number, almost a quarter of organizations, planning to increase their spend significantly. So I think this is great news that the threat is, even though it's evolving, it is widely acknowledged that this is something that just has to be addressed. So really interesting to see, and hopefully we'll continue and start to get more on top of this challenge as an industry.
And lastly, we have a paper that ESG has done around ExaGrid's retention time lock capability. And you can sort of see that it's on exagrid.com. If you go to the exagrid.com website, there is an ESG white paper there that goes in depth about our retention time lock capability for ransomware recovery.
Great. Bill, thanks so much for your time. And to our audience, thank you for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.